Hey listeners, be sure to check out slipdisc.com for the latest inside information on classical music now. Kenji López-Alt is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, renowned chef, culinary scientist, YouTube sensation, and violinist. While he famously combined his talents for food and science to transform the way we cook and eat at home, his true passion lies in his first love.
Music it's my favorite thing to do. I enjoy playing music more than I enjoy cooking. There's nothing I like more than playing music with other people, like whether it's reading string quartets, playing in a rock band, or singing songs with my kids. Yeah, there's nothing I like more than playing music.
You're listening to Speaking Soundly, a backstage pass to today's biggest stars of the music world. I'm your host, David Krause, principal trumpet of the Metropolitan Opera. During each episode, you'll hear me speak with inspiring performers about their creative process and the personal journey that led them to the stage. I'm so excited to talk to you, and to be honest, I've had on a lot of amazing musicians, but I'm really starstruck to be talking to the guy that invented the reverse sear steak.
Oh, I don't know about invented. I would say popularized, or maybe
Coin the phrase.
invented is stretching it.
Okay, well, regardless, it's impressive to me. So thanks for taking the time to talk about the musical recipes in your life.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're not a musician by trade, but
No.
you studied the violin growing up, and music is still a part of your life. And it seems like you could have gone into music just as easily as you went into cooking, because you started at MIT and somehow found your way into this amazing career in food. I'm curious if there was ever a time in your life that you thought that, maybe I'll be a musician.
Oh, yeah, my whole life. I mean, I would love to be a musician. In fact, when I was graduating high school, or when I was applying to colleges, the big choice was, do I apply to music conservatories or do I apply to engineering schools? The only reason I ended up going to MIT was because my high school physics teacher was like, well, it's probably easier to do engineering and go into music as a second career than it is to go into music and get into engineering as a second career. So I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if that's true or not, but it made sense. And so I went to school for engineering. And he also said, like, if you get into MIT and you don't go to MIT, you're stupid. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll go to MIT. No, I mean, music is something it's my favorite thing to do. I enjoy playing music more than I enjoy cooking. There's nothing I like more than playing music with other people, and any kind of music, whether it's reading string quartets, which I still do, weekly at my house with friends, or playing in a rock band in college, or singing songs with my kids. Like, yeah, there's nothing I like more than playing music with other people.
Even as an amateur, I'd say you're doing pretty well hanging out with the likes of James Ehnes.
I am extraordinarily lucky. Like, I pinch myself sometimes, but like, I just got to touch James Ehnes's Strad and play. And James and I are doing a live show in Seattle over the summer, July 29th, a show about food and music. It's going to be a benefit for the Seattle Chamber Music Society, which he's the director of. We're going to have this piano quintet playing, but we're also going to have some cooks from one of the best restaurants here in Seattle cooking on stage. I'm going to get to play violin on stage at Benaroya Hall with James Ehnes, which is like, oh my God.
That's crazy.
It's like completely insane to me.
Is he going to cook with you?
And he's going to cook with me, yeah.
I'm sure he's going to feel the same way chopping an onion as you do playing Schubert with him.
Maybe.
So we actually have a musical connection and probably crossed paths in that my wife is a violinist, and straight out of college, she started working at the School for Strings here in Midtown Manhattan, where she remembers you and your sisters fondly. My own kids went to that school, and one of them studied with your violin teacher,
Catherine Gerson.
Yeah, she was such a prominent figure in my kids' musical lives.
Oh, yeah.
What were violin lessons like with her, and did you enjoy going to that school?
Oh, yeah. We loved her, and she became one of our closest family friends. She and my mom were extraordinarily close. I think, like all good teachers, she tailored her instruction based on who you are and what your personality is, right? And I was kind of like a pest, I was kind of a rascally kid. And she put up with all of it, and somehow still like inspired me to want to practice and want to get better at what I did. I loved her as a teacher.
School for Strings is a Suzuki-based school, which means that kids can start there very young. My kids started there when they're 3 years old. How old were you when you started?
I started playing violin at 4. I grew up listening to my sister practicing and watching my sister in group classes and stuff. And so I was dying to get into it myself, which I'm seeing in my own kids. My daughter is 6. She started taking lessons when she was 4, violin. And, now I have a son who's 2. And so he's grown up listening to his older sister practice. And I feel like, the more exposure you get, obviously, the faster you progress. And every kid is different, but I find the Suzuki method to be, pretty special and very unique. It teaches you to appreciate and to understand music before you can even sort of, read it. It to me, it's kind of like how you can learn to speak to someone without understanding the intricacies of grammar, without knowing how to spell words. And that's just because you do it, you practice it, and you apply it practically every day. And then you can go back and learn the grammar and learn how to spell and all that. And Suzuki takes the same approach where you learn music before you can read notes, and you just get these basic sort of concepts and sounds into your head that you can then go on and sort of decipher.
What were your earliest musical memories?
I definitely have memories of playing in group classes where you go and just play with all of your peers, older and younger, more advanced students and younger students. So I remember sitting in the front. When you're only in book 1 and you only know a couple pieces, you spend a lot of time sitting in the front, looking back at the older kids who are playing the more advanced stuff. And the idea is that you get all those things in your head so that you pick them up more easily later on. But yeah, I definitely remember sitting in group class, watching and being like, oh man, one day I'm going to be standing during this part too.
It's the little things. And part of those group classes means that the parents are right there with you. Were
Mhm.
your parents musical? Because taking 3 kids to school for strings every day after your normal
Right.
school is a big commitment, not only for the students, but for the parents as well. Was music a big part of their lives? Because they must have really wanted it to be a part of yours.
So my mom is the one who took us to music school. She also um, practiced with us every day. So my mom probably devoted a good 3 to 5 hours a day to
It's a lot.
doing music with us, right? Yeah, it's an awful lot. She was not music. I mean, she played the piano when she was little, but she said one of her biggest regrets was that her parents never made her practice. And so she made us practice. In the way that a lot of parents kind of try and live vicariously through their kids. She made us practice because she didn't want us to have that same experience of it growing up and thinking, oh, like I wish I'd practiced more when I kid. Now she tells me, I wish I hadn't made you guys practice so much because it was so difficult. It's very difficult in our relationship to make a kid practice violin. It's the kids don't. I didn't want to practice. I didn't enjoy practicing until I was 13. 12 or 13. I didn't really enjoy music much until I was that old. Until I went to Greenwood, until I went to chamber music camp.
Music camp. Yeah.
Exactly, and started playing with my peers and playing and realized like, oh, like this is what's nice about music, like playing with other people.
So it was the social aspect, not necessarily the musical connection.
Well, part of it was a social aspect, but when you play chamber music, you connect with people in a way that is different from anything else I know. Right? It's different from having a conversation. It's different from like playing a game with someone. It's different from going to a movie with someone. It's a very intense, like electric connection that you get when you play chamber music and you're really in tune with other people. And that's the kind of connection that you can't feel unless you have the technical chops to be able to do it. Right? Like you can't be thinking about what your finger is going to do next if you want to be able to play with other people. Like once you get those technical chops and you don't have to think about what your fingers are doing, then it frees up your mind to think about connecting with other people. And I think that's sort of the real magic of playing music for me. And I feel that connection, whether, I feel it when I'm playing chamber music. I feel it when I'm, like my dad is not into classical music, but he loves bluegrass and he loves rock. And so he plays guitar and banjo, as an amateur, but he loves it. So we have like a kind of little family band and we play together whenever we can. And most holidays we'll get together and play together. And, you connect with people with music in a way that you can't connect in any other medium, I think.
When do you think the first time your fingers knew where to go without thinking about it? When you're like, hey, this is happening. I'm actually doing this.
Probably it was once I got to the point where I could read music like I can read a book, where I didn't have to think of the definition of a word, where I just see the music and my fingers do it. Like that's when I felt like, okay, yeah, like My fingers got it now. It's funny, like my daughter, my daughter is 6, I mentioned, and I took her to a concert a couple weeks ago, where James Ehnes was playing a Beethoven sonata. And afterwards, he came out and talked with us, and my daughter wanted to ask him some questions. So she asked him, what is the hardest part of playing music? And he said, the most difficult part of playing music is when you have something in your head that you want to get out, but your body won't do it. When your fingers won't produce what you have in your mind. And she said, and she was like, that's the most difficult thing for me. Like the most frustrating part is that she knows how something's supposed to sound, and she knows on paper how she's supposed to do it, but actually just getting her fingers to do that thing is difficult. And so she talks about how she has to teach her fingers, like her fingers have to learn a little better, and like her fingers have brains, and they need to get this into their brains.
Her fingers have brains. I like
Yeah.
that. What kind of student were you? You know, I have it on good authority that what's the quote that one of your friends told me that you were an energetic kid who was always annoying your teachers. Is that a pretty accurate representation?
Yes, I was a pest. I was a pesky little kid. It's funny. My high school orchestra conductor, his name is Damian Sokol. He just passed away a couple weeks ago. But he was extraordinarily important in my life. He wrote he personally published his memoirs. He sent me a copy of it a couple months ago, saying just a month or two before he died. But in his memoirs, he wrote this passage about how when I was in middle school, he said he caught me just staring at him. Like he was talking to the orchestra, trying to get something through to us, and just caught me staring at him through rehearsal once. And he was like, "What, like Kenji, what are you staring at?" And I said, like in front of the old orchestra, "No, I'm just trying to count the hairs inside your nose." um, yeah, and my mother told me that when I was 4 or 5 and I was going to group classes, that every time we would bow, I would do a somersault, like with my violin tucked in rest position.
That's impressive.
Anyhow, yeah.
I also heard that you were involved in many pranks, especially at Greenwood Music Camp. And knowing
Oh yeah,
you,
yeah.
a Kenji prank is probably an elaborate, well thought out, well executed one. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. I mean, as well thought out and elaborate as like a 12 or 13-year-old could do, I guess. Yeah, we had prank. They were always harmless pranks. But there was a night when me and Neil and Eve snuck out of our cabin and unscrewed and stole every toilet seat from the entire camp, and then set them up as a chamber orchestra, like set up a little chamber orchestra in the house where we have breakfast, and set all the toilets. That was a silly prank, but
It's
we did
pretty
that.
good.
I mean, Greenwood was a very special place. It's very safe to say I would not be into music right now if I'd not gone there. That was really the moment that everything kind of changed for me as far as my relationship to music.
Going to music camp is a tremendous social structure for
Right.
kids. I know that I found that I kind of blossomed and I found
Oh, absolutely.
my people. Was that your experience as well?
Absolutely. Both musically and socially. I mean, yeah, I was a nerd in high school and middle school, and this was like back when being a nerd wasn't cool. When I went to music camp, and I feel like chamber musicians are maybe like the original hipsters, because it was cool to be nerdy before it became cool to be nerdy. So certainly there was like a degree of social freedom that I had never felt before. But what really got me was the idea that people were playing music beyond what they were made to do. That to me like kind of blew my mind, that like people are doing this for fun. And then I tried it and I was like, oh, it is fun.
Your approach to food and creating recipes is based in a scientific method and full of trial and error. I think you went through something like 1,500 attempts before perfecting your chocolate chip cookie recipe.
I made 1,500 individual cookies, but those are batches of like 24 or something. So but it was several hundred iterations, I think.
All right. Did you approach the violin with that same kind of steadfast determination? Did that focus pave its way into your violin practice?
Not really. I didn't love practicing. I remember my mother, if she couldn't be there to listen to us while we were practicing, she would make us record ourselves. So if she had to leave the house, like I had to record myself practicing for 2 hours, and she would come back, and eventually I realized, all she does is fast forward through the tape, and here's like the sped up version of it. And so I eventually realized we had 2 tape decks at home, so I could just record myself practicing for 15 minutes and then just loop the tape back and forth, record it onto another tape and loop it over and over,
You're,
and she
you're
wouldn't
the
figure it out.
Ferris Bueller of the violin.
And to be honest, like doing that would take as long as it would have taken to just practice in the first place. But I was always trying to come up with clever ways to not have to practice. So in retrospect, it's probably a good thing I didn't become a musician, because I don't think I have the patience to practice the way a professional musician really needs to.
Great food is undoubtedly an art. So, like any other art form, the more you understand the theory behind it and master its techniques, the more art you can make. Do you think your early foundation wrestling with your violin technique set you up well for the grueling process of learning how to cook professionally? I mean, you learned on the job. You didn't train at Le Cordon Bleu or the Culinary Institute.
Yeah, I learned on the job. And a lot of cooks, sort of my generation and before and earlier, didn't go to culinary school. They learned on the job. Um, I don't know that I really made the connection between music and food until much later. I didn't grow up cooking, and in fact, I was not really a particularly good eater. I wasn't super picky, but I wasn't really into food. And my first restaurant job I got as an accident. I was just trying to make some money for the summer, and I was looking for a job as a server, and a restaurant offered me a job as a cook because they had another cook who didn't show up that day, the morning I walked in and asking for a job, and they said, well, you can work if you can hold a knife, you can work as a cook for the summer. I was like, all right. So for me, it was actually sort of the social aspect of the restaurant that got me into cooking. It's like it was a ton of adrenaline. You're working as a team with a bunch of other people. Restaurants back then were very competitive, and I back then was very competitive also. So that was certainly part of it. Like every night was like an adrenaline rush. It felt like a challenge. You felt like you were really sort of accomplishing. In a restaurant, if the feeling I had was that I'm taking these things, doing some stuff to them with my hands and transforming them into something that someone wants to pay money for, like something that gives someone pleasure, something that gives someone value. And so to me, that transformation was pretty cool. And and the other big similarity is that just as I was saying, like once you get the technical elements down, that's when the exciting stuff happens, right? That's when you can start adding your own interpretation, and when you can start expressing, you can bring to someone could have the greatest ideas in the world in their head, but if they don't have a way to translate those ideas into the real world, they can't share them, right? And then it's not, is it really music if it's just in your head, or is it really a brilliant dish if it's just in your head? And so, both in music and food, like there's a technical barrier, a technique-based barrier, a theory-based barrier, whatever it is that you need to overcome before you can start taking those thoughts that are in your head and putting them into a form that other people can share and experience. So in that sense, they're very similar. Like I often make the metaphor that learning techniques in cooking, like learning how to properly saute something, learning how to chop something, learning how to flip a skillet, that those skills are in a way, it's like if you have a jazz musician who's improvising, they're not just improvising because they have good ideas in their head. Like they're able to improvise because they have the tools it takes to bring what's in their head out into the real world and to do it in real time, which just requires a lot of practice and a lot of discipline. And it's something that you can't, like good ideas alone isn't going to get you there.
You've had a varied career, and it certainly wasn't a direct path to where you are now.
Yeah.
Did you ever get so discouraged that you thought just about giving up or changing gears?
No. I loved cooking. For me, it's like as long as I'm learning, I'm happy. Certainly financially, there were times when it was extremely rough. My first restaurant job, I was paid $9 an hour. And in fact, my last restaurant job in Boston, I was paid. I had a annual salary of $27,000, and I was working 80, 90 hours a week. So I would work 6 days a week at one restaurant. I would go from 10 a.m. Until midnight, 6 days a week, and then on my day off, I would go to my chef's other restaurant and work for free. Financially, it was difficult. The good part was that I didn't have to pay for meals because I would just, we get family meal at the restaurant. So I didn't really have to spend, and I never had time to spend money because I was always working. So in that sense, it was good. But I guess, my sort of, I would say my rock bottom as far as my career in cooking goes was when I did feel, and I think many cooks go through this, when I felt like, okay, I'm a line cook. I'm working at a restaurant. Like, what is this going to turn into? Right? I can't spend the rest of my life as a line cook. As much as I enjoy working in restaurants and the adrenaline, I can't spend the rest of my life making less than minimum wage as a line cook. I can't financially, I can't do it. I can't do it to my body. Like, you think about doing that kind of work in your 40s. Like even in my early 20s, like my knees killed me because I was on my feet all the time. And imagine doing that into my 40s. And then luckily I saw a friend of mine saw a job posting for a test cook position at a magazine at Cooks Illustrated. And so I applied for that job and got it. And that was a very big change for me, and a very good change, because it allowed me, in restaurants, there is that sort of adrenaline. You gain a lot of skills, but there's not a lot of opportunity to sort of explore sort of the questions of technique and science that I was curious about. And ever since then, I've tried to make every career move like a little more freedom to do what I want to do personally. My goal has always been have fewer and fewer bosses, until I got to the place where I don't have a boss, which is great.
You had mentioned that your daughter plays violin, and about a year and a half ago or so, you posted about a recital that she played on where she played all the variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, which is a huge milestone for any young violinist. And you wrote how you ugly cried during
Yeah.
it. It must have been a great moment for you just to see the work that she had put in pay off.
Yeah, no, it was. But maybe I'll start ugly crying again right now. But yeah, I mean, I was incredibly, incredibly proud of her. You know, I think every parent who has kids that they make practice music goes through this thing. It's like, is it worth it? It's difficult, right? It's difficult. It's a strain on your relationship, because kids don't necessarily want to practice. Like sometimes, some days are great, and and I do my best. Like we play games, I do silly things. Like we do our best to make it fun, but some days just are not fun. And so it's like for me, I didn't like music until I was like 13, right? And then when I finally did, I was like, this is what that was all about. And so I had that moment where I was like, okay, this has made it worth it for me. Is she going to have that moment? I don't know. And do I really want to go through, you know, 9 years from age 4 to age 13 of like struggles every day, not every day, but like, pretty regular struggles. In some ways, I think teaching someone that being able to put in the discipline to, work at something that is difficult is worth it. I think that's a good lesson to learn, period. And so, the moment where she played all through her Twinkle variations, how much of it is that I'm happy because I'm like selfishly looking forward to having another musician in the family that I can play with, and there's definitely some of that. It's like, I want my kids to play music because I want to be able to play music with my kids. I want to have the connection that I have with other people when I'm playing chamber music. I want to have that kind of connection with my kids. And so that's a question I struggle with. Like, should I make my daughter practice when she doesn't want to? I don't know.
Well, if you did and you recorded her practice sessions, now with AI, your daughter could fake better practice tapes than you did.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, in that post, you went on to write about how hard it is to convince a kid to practice because it's not practical. You don't need it in everyday life, but the rewards can be huge. What are some of those rewards that you hope that your daughter gets from practicing the violin?
Well, I guess the same rewards that I've felt in my life, which is that there's this entire universe that's unlocked for me, that's unlocked for musicians, people who can play music that I think is completely foreign to other people, right? It's like I get to experience these things that I would not be able to experience without having had music in my life. And of course, everybody's thoughts on this are going to vary, but I feel that of all sort of the art forms, music is the one that it's the most abstracted from the real world, that is able to draw emotions and feelings out of you in a way that you can't really explain why it does it, right? I don't know why the cavatina, the fifth movement of Beethoven's Opus 130, the piece that he had played at his funeral, I don't know why that makes me feel tingles on my back when I hear it. I even thinking about it now, like I'm feeling tingles on my back. I don't know why that happens. There's no explanation for me. It's like there's no connection between those notes and the way they interact and the real world in any sort of one-to-one analogy sense, the way there is in other types of art, the way there is in food, for example, or food is sustenance. Visual arts reflect things that we see. Music doesn't. Music is its own sort of pure, almost abstract thing that is able to, I think, therefore able to kind of burrow into us. And it's also, music is such a collective enjoyment thing, whether it's going to like a stadium show, watching like a band play at a stadium show, and you're connecting with tens of thousands of people moving in unison, like that's super powerful. Or you're just, 4 people in a room playing music together. It connects people in a way that I don't think any other art form connects people. That's what I want my kids to have out of it. I want them to have, all these little experiences that show them like what worlds music can open up and what connections music can open up for you, whether you go on to do it professionally or not. I don't want her to be a professional musician unless she wants to be, but to be able to experience those things, I think is very special and very magical.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Speaking Soundly. If you like what you heard, please tell your friends about it. Spread the word. Be sure to follow, rate us, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. To keep up on future episodes, follow us on Instagram at SpeakingSNDLY and visit our website, artfulnarrativesmedia.com. Tune in next week as we hear another inspiring artist speaking soundly.